Story 1. It was just another late evening commute. Sarah, a young woman in her mid-20s, had just finished work and was on her usual train ride home. The train was empty, save for a few scattered passengers. She sat by the window, lost in her thoughts, the sound of the train wheels against the tracks providing a comforting rhythm. Suddenly, as the train passed through a particularly dark stretch of track, Sarah thought she saw something moving in the shadows. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible. Her heart skipped a beat, but she dismissed it as just her mind playing tricks. Still, the unease lingered. She tried to focus on her phone, but the quiet tapping of her fingers against the screen seemed louder in the silence. When the train pulled into the next station, she stood up to leave, but something made her pause. There, in the reflection of the train's window, she saw a figure standing at the far end of the platform. It was a man, unmoving, staring directly at her. Shivers ran down her spine. The man was standing just out of view of the station's lights, his face obscured by darkness. She quickly stepped off the train, her heart pounding. The man remained still, watching her as she hurried toward the exit. She glanced back just once more. The man was no longer on the platform. In fact, the entire area was empty. But when Sarah walked past the station security cameras the next day, she froze. There in the footage was a man, her mysterious stalker, watching her, his eyes fixed on her every movement. The footage had been recorded hours after she left the station. No one ever saw him again. But every night, Sarah still feels a weight of unseen eyes on her. Story 2. A group of friends, eager for adventure, decided to spend the weekend in the woods. They'd heard rumors about an old, abandoned house deep within the trees, and with their curiosity piqued, they set out to explore. It was a hike through thick underbrush, the air damp with the scent of pine. They laughed and joked, but as they ventured further, the atmosphere grew oddly still. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. When they finally arrived, the house loomed before them like a forgotten monument to time. The windows were broken, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Still, they pressed on, ignoring the growing sense of dread, gnawing at their instincts. The inside of the house was in disarray, dust-covered furniture, broken glass, and peeling wallpaper. But there was something else, too, a feeling that they weren't alone. Strange noises echoed from somewhere in the dark corners of the house, almost like faint whispers, but the group brushed it off as a wind. As they explored, one of the friends, Tom, noticed something odd, fresh footprints in the dust. They weren't from any of them. Nervous laughter filled the air as they tried to rationalize it, but unease began to settle over them like a heavy fog. At that moment, the front door slammed shut, sending a shock of panic through the group. They ran toward the exit, but the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, closing in on them. Just as they made it to the door, they heard something or someone move in the darkness behind them. They left the house, heartbeats thundering in their chests, but when they returned the following weekend, the house had vanished, replaced by nothing but an empty field. The footprints, too, had disappeared. Story 3. Mark had always lived a quiet life in a suburban neighborhood. The house next door had been vacant for months, and Mark had grown used to the eerie silence. One morning, however, he noticed a moving truck parked outside. A new neighbor. He didn't think much of it, but when he saw the man, a tall, disheveled figure, he felt an odd sense of unease. The man was carrying boxes, his movements jerky and unnatural. His eyes were wide but empty, as though he wasn't really looking at anything. Over the next few days, Mark observed the new neighbor from his window. He noticed that the man seemed to be home at all hours, yet never interacted with anyone. No visitors, no phone calls, not even away from a porch. Strange, but Mark thought nothing of it. That evening, Mark was outside tending to his garden when he saw the neighbor once again, standing at his front door, staring at Mark's house. No movement, no sound, just an eerie stillness. Mark waved, but the neighbor didn't respond. He just stood there, eyes fixed on him. The next morning, Mark went next door to introduce himself, but the house was empty. No sign of the man, and the moving truck was gone. No one could remember anyone ever living there, and the neighbors hadn't seen a moving truck either. Mark still wonders if he ever really saw the man, or if he was something else entirely. Story 4. It was the kind of place you'd find on a postcard, A serene lake nestled between tall pine trees, quiet except for the occasional splash of a fish leaping. Rachel had spent her childhood summers here with her family. Years later, she returned alone for some much-needed solitude. The cabin was just as she remembered it, rustic, with wood paneling and a crackling fireplace. She spent her days fishing, hiking, and rediscovering the peace she had lost over the years. But one evening, after a long walk through the woods, something felt wrong. As she approached the cabin, she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. She turned, expecting to see an animal or perhaps a person, but there was nothing. It was only when she reached the cabin's porch that she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, crunching leaves on the forest floor. Startled, Rachel spun around, but no one was there. She was alone, yet the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. It wasn't until she entered the cabin that she noticed it. The door to the back room was ajar. It had been locked when she left. She cautiously approached the door, the hairs on her neck prickling. As she pushed it open, a cold gust of wind blew past her, as though something had just rushed out. The room was empty, except for an old, dusty rocking chair that creaked back and forth on its own. The next morning, she packed up and left, but as she drove down the winding road away from the lake, she glanced in the rear-view mirror. A figure stood on the porch, watching her leave. Rachel never returned to that lake again. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was still there, waiting for her to come back.